President Joe Biden is out of the 2024 race. But what sort of economic legacy will he leave behind? On this episode of Reuters Econ World, we go deep on Bidenomics. We look at the economic policies that have defined Biden's one and only term as president, and what a new administration might mean for them. It's what we do here on Reuters Econ World. Every week, we pick a phrase or buzzword and go deep on the economic principles and ideas driving the biggest news around the world. So this week, Bidenomics. I'm your host, Carmel Crimmins in Dublin.
So I came into office determined to change the economic direction of this country, to move from trickle-down economics to what everyone on Wall Street Journal and Financial Times began to call Bidenomics. I didn't come up with the name. I really didn't. I now claim it.
Joe Biden wanted to be an economically transformative president. He wanted to shrink inequality, fix the US's crumbling infrastructure, and rebuild America's tech production base.
Bidenomics is about building an economy from the middle out and the bottom up, not the top down.
He brought back industrial policy, rebranded as supply-side economics with a liberal tilt. And his economic legislation, including the American Rescue Plan to stimulate the economy during COVID and the Inflation Reduction Act, saw billions of dollars worth of subsidies and investments showered across the country.
This is going to transform the country in a way you don't even understand yet. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
It may take years to reveal whether Biden's policies will pay off. That's if Donald Trump doesn't reverse them if he wins a second term as president.
On day one of my new administration, we will throw out Bidenomics and replace it with Maganomics.
Critics say Biden ran up the deficit, stoked inflation, and meddled in the free market economy. So who will be proved right? I've two people steeped in politics and economics to discuss Bidenomics and the economic legacy of President Biden. From the White House, we have our correspondent Trevor Hunnicutt. Hey, Trevor.
Hi, nice to see you.
You too. And from Howard, where are you? Are you in D.C.?
Yeah, no, not hardly. Pawleys Island, South Carolina. We're actually on vacation right now, but anything for you, Carmel.
Oh my God. Howard on his vacation.
Yeah.
Such is the state of U.S. politics right now.
It's low tide right now, so there's nothing to do.
Well, what else would you be doing, right? So coming in from Pawleys Island, South Carolina, we have Howard Schneider, our Federal Reserve correspondent. So one thing we know for sure in this tumultuous presidential race is that we're looking at the last months of the Biden presidency. So as we head towards an ending, maybe we could give listeners a sense of the beginning of his economic agenda. What was the spur for it, Trevor?
So as far as the ideas, I think the Biden team came into office with a lot of optimism about being able to change some things structurally about the U.S. economy.
Mm-hmm.
And so just in terms of staffing, I think Joe Biden surprised a lot of people by bringing in a lot of people who had worked for Elizabeth Warren, his primary competitor,
right,
who had a lot of progressive ideas. There were a lot of lawyers in the mix who wanted to kind of shake things up in terms of competition policy, right? Getting more companies to compete and to be very aggressive on mergers.
Mm-hmm.
And then also in terms of industrial policy, right? So getting behind the chips industry, electric vehicles, batteries, this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of kind of optimism coming into this administration that they could kind of fundamentally rework the economy in a way that would benefit workers. And then as far as kind of coming up with this term Bidenomics, it was something that Biden's senior team saw written about in newspapers in a derogatory fashion.
Right.
And they thought, let's adopt this term. Let's flip the script.
Okay, let's own it.
Let's own it. And a lot of them ended up regretting that later because it never really caught on in a good way for them.
It was definitely a break from the pro-globalization policies of any of Biden's Democratic predecessors, Howard. And it really embraced a bigger role for the federal government in the economy.
Well, I think you could distill it across two things. Sort of one is strategic and one is, for lack of a better word, normative or moral. And I think on the strategic side, it's a willingness to make big bets on industries, as Trevor mentioned. Second, on the moral side, I would think that you're involved here with really an effort to expand and through student loan forgiveness, through expanded child tax credits. Not all of this was successful, but this was the idea.
Yeah.
Really drawing a bigger perimeter around what the government does for families and really expanding benefits up pretty solidly into the middle class. And it's not just about making sure a poor working mother can buy food. It's about making sure that the person who has gone to college, gotten a degree, borrowed a lot of money to get there will also be able to save money and not be saddled with debt for the rest of their life. So two aspects of that. And I would say just one thing. You mentioned that this is a break. Biden was ringside for the response to the 2007-2009 crisis under Obama. And in hindsight, a lot of progressive economists felt it was too little, too late, very tepid.
Right.
And as a result, you had really took 7 years to get the unemployment rate back down to something like normal, right? They didn't want to do that again. Framing was when there's a problem, you go big, you go fast, you spend the money. And that's Bidenomics, I think.
Can we say, how is it done? Can we give it a scorecard, Howard?
Well, I'm going to let Trevor speak to the politics of it, because obviously that's one of the big mysteries is why I'm sitting in South Carolina here, a very red state. A lot of money got spent here on public works projects and things like that, as they did in Texas, which is one of the leaders in terms of the investment that's been made over the last couple of years. None of that seemed to fall back into their laps. How is it done? I think it's going to take will it finish? Will it be completed? This was a generational prospect, right?
Right.
A generational prospect in terms of the carbon transition, in terms of investments in places that had been left behind.
Politically, Trevor, how has it gone down?
Not supremely well. When Biden was elected in 2020, and you asked voters which party is better on the economy, it was basically a coin flip in terms of how voters felt. And now, after nearly 4 years of him being in office, he's underwater on that scorecard, and people think that Trump would be better on the economy. And so that's not a good sign in terms of their messaging breaking through with people. And when you ask people in the White House and people in the Biden campaign about why that is, they think that a lot of the general kind of malaise and negativity that people feel about things generally is impacting how they see the economy. And so they may have a job, they may be in a secure financial position, but they worry about their kids' future, they worry about the country's future. And that leads them to this kind of anti-incumbency bias. Does that mean that the Biden people are changing or adjusting their messaging? No, it doesn't at all. In fact, they are very much running this campaign, Kamala Harris's campaign now, on the idea that they are running against somebody who is creating policies for the wealthy and that they are creating policies for the middle class and everybody else.
Yeah.
And so that is kind of the messaging that they have chosen for November, whether it works or not. You know, what if I could just jump in real quick?
Yeah.
That always fascinated me, Trevor, about this is you go back to the 2020, the primary campaign coming in before the pandemic and all that, right? You had all these ideas out there. This was the modern monetary theory, redistribution, all this work on capital accumulation in the U.S. and the economics of place and how if you're born poor, you're going to stay poor. And there are all these ideas floating around that Biden took half the pie here and said, we like this part of it, but we're not going to get into the sort of redistributional parts of this, tax the wealthy and give the money away or something like that. He never went down that road, only to the extent that there was this IRS enforcement piece, right? That you're going to collect the taxes due. But he never went down the Elizabeth Warren, let's get the rich to really put a whole bunch more money in the pie here so that we can hand it out. I was always curious about why.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. And for the way they thought about things is we have an order to do things in. One, we need to deal with this immediate crisis that we're in of joblessness and health issues and this sort of thing. And then after that, industrial policy, which they thought was going to, including the infrastructure build and all of these sorts of things, that this was going to kind of restart the economy and they'd have broad support behind it. And then they thought they left the most difficult task for last.
Yeah.
And I say difficult because when you get into tax policy, you've got the Trump tax cuts that are expiring in 2025. And you've got Democrats that do not have any sort of agreement on what to do about different elements of that tax package, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got state and local tax deductions, which is something that impacts primarily wealthier people in coastal states, not swing states.
Mm-hmm.
Those people have different opinions from people who are in the center of the country. And so kind of figuring out all of those things, they said, let's kind of push those things off and deal with those a little bit later. So I do think tax policy will be a much, much bigger part of the next presidential term, whether it's Trump or Harris, just simply because they've got this looming deadline of figuring out what to do about the expiring Trump tax cuts.
Now, every week we like to take a real-world look at what we're talking about. And one of the most interesting aspects of Biden's economic record is how he doesn't appear to be getting much credit for an economy which, by many standards, is buzzing along very nicely. You've got growth rates that are the envy of the rest of the world and a red-hot jobs market. So what's the problem? Bluntly put, high prices. Inflationary pressures have dropped way back, but prices are still a major source of frustration. One of Biden's goals has been to boost the minimum wage to cushion the impact on workers. Earlier this year, fast food workers in California started receiving a $20 an hour minimum wage. Brian Hom, who runs 2 cafes in South San Jose, can see the benefits.
My workers, I'm happy for them. And 80% of my workers are high school and college. So it's great because they can now afford to save and pay their college tuitions and stuff.
But he's also worried about the impact on his business.
It's kind of a catch-22, I know, where people want higher wages, but at the same time, the costs to run the business, it doesn't work out. We've been looking at our staffing to see if we need to cut hours, and eventually, as time goes on, if the cost of wages and cost of labor is too high, maybe laying off. And long term would be, if we're not making a profit, we would have to close down.
Has Biden changed the American economy forever through the legislation he's passed? In other words, even after November, will his legacy or some part of it endure?
No, I don't think so by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, you could make an argument that if you ascribe a certain amount of recent inflation to federal spending and the kind of juice pumped into the economy through the American Rescue Plan, that may be his legacy, that we had to live through this cycle of interest rate hikes and all of the turbulence that. I don't think anything he's done yet. Yes, at the margin, there'll be some more chips made here. Are we going to get 30%, 40%, 50% of global production? No, nowhere near that. Is the EV revolution going to continue? I don't think the $7,500 rebate's going to drive that. What's going to drive that is ultimately market economics and innovation. You might coax another mile or 2 per gallon out of internal combustion engines, but if there's going to be a tech breakthrough, it's going to be across the battery platforms and the mileage and the range and the pricing there. That seems to be something that consumers will adopt as the market compels them to adopt it. Investment in local infrastructure, look, that's always a good idea, but I don't think there's anything transformative there. You might get a little bit of a productivity boost if you've got more efficient airports and roads, but it's not going to be like the invention of the steam engine or anything like that in terms of a productivity enhancing thing. So yeah, it's marginal improvement over time, but transformative, I don't think yet. And Trump may just rip it all up.
Bidenomics is often contrasted with Reaganomics, which did have a long-term impact on the US economy. Why do you not think Bidenomics will be as consequential?
Really interesting question. Listen, one thing that Reaganomics had on its side was a Supreme Court that didn't stand in the way. And the deregulatory agenda, things like that, kind of largely went through unchallenged. You've already seen in the Chevron decision right now, for example, some upending of what Bidenomics, in spirit anyway, would probably do, which is the use of the tools of an administrative state of a federal government to achieve certain ends.
Right.
You think about antitrust enforcement, for example, which has been at a record pace. So there's a possible check on that if the Democrats are elected. But in terms of the level of spending and what they've been able to change about the law yet, I think that some of that won't be known for 5 or 10 or 15 years. They've certainly jump-started potentially the carbon transition. Will what they've done so far move us to a fossil-free economy? I don't see that anytime soon. Right now, there are tax credits for electric vehicles, heat pumps, all sorts of things. It's going to take an act of Congress to stop that. So do they win did the Democrats win the House or not? We don't know.
Right.
Does all of the funding that's in train through the Department of Commerce and whatnot for not only infrastructure but local technology hubs, things like that, does that continue or not? We don't know. I just think imponderable.
And if Kamala Harris wins in November, will the fundamentals of Bidenomics remain? The concept of government involvement in the economy?
I think she definitely shares President Biden's view that, and you've seen this in his budget that he's put out every single year, he wants to expand the role of the federal government in the economy, and he wants to raise taxes in order to pay for that. So that's a very clear difference from what Republicans are proposing. And Kamala Harris broadly agrees with that vision.
Certainly, Biden's age kind of overshadowed everything. But now that we know he is not running, that this will be his one and only term, do you think in the long run, economic history will treat him kindly?
I think that in some senses it will. I mean, the United States has come out of a terrible shock and a terrible crisis in a decent position in terms of fairly moderate inflation now relative to a lot of other places in the world, in terms of still having something that looks a lot like full employment, and in terms of continuing to be competitive in the global economy and doing a little bit of reshoring and a little bit of friendshoring and bringing some of those jobs back to the United States. I think in the long run, what people in the White House here are really concerned about is the fact that China is zooming ahead of the United States in so many dimensions, and including all of the industrial policy things that Biden was able to get his wish on. Chips. China is putting way more money into developing that industry than the United States is. And the feeling here is that if the United States gets left behind, it's not just going to be calamitous for the economy, but it's also going to mean that China gets the military edge as well, because technology, economy, military are all linked. And I think how that competition shakes out is going to determine a lot about how Biden's presidency is seen in the future.
That's it for this edition of Reuters Econ World. We're taking a break for the next 3 weeks. Unlike Howard, you won't be hearing from me on my summer vacation. I wonder, is that proving a point about the difference between US and European productivity levels? We actually have a pod about that. Check it out on the Reuters app or wherever you get your podcasts. But don't worry, we'll be back in August, raring to go on the economic angles driving the biggest news around the world. Until then, a big thank you to Howard Schneider, Trevor Hunnicutt, and everyone who covers economics at Reuters. And a big thank you to you too for listening to this pod since its launch in May. I hope you get a break over the summer too. Sound design on this show is by Josh Summer. Lila de Kretzer is our executive producer. Our podcast team includes Kim Vinnell, Tara Oakes, Gail Issa, David Spencer, Jonah Green, and Chris Wall-Jasper. Remember, for all your daily news, check out our weekday show, Reuters World News. You can catch it on the Reuters app or wherever you listen to your podcasts.